You're listening to the Precision Shooting Podcast, discussing all aspects of precision and long-range rifle shooting. This episode is brought to you by STS Steel Targets, premium shooting targets and accessories. And now, over to your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to the Precision Shooting Podcast. My name is Rusty and this is episode number 62. Is that right, Andrew?
Yep.
Excellent, mate. Glad you were on board. Speaking of which, this episode is brought to you by STS Targets. I know all of us in the room have used those. Thanks very much to STS. I'm sure we'll bring that up again later. But with me in the room this evening, to my right, Andrew, who you've already heard from.
Good evening.
Good evening, mate. Thought you were going to do it again. And over there is Mr. Mug Signer himself.
Yeah. I am signing more tonight. Yeah. I'll get my special gold pen out.
Excellent. Well, I've got a story about the last one you signed. And joining us as well, now, make sure I'm correct in this, from the South Australian F-Class team.
Yes.
Jason, how you going?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, very good, mate. Do we give out your full name, or is that, classified?
Oh, that's fine.
Jason Nessling has joined us this evening, and he's here to chat about some topics with us. Thanks very much for taking some time and joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, Greg, back to the mug story. I sent a mug over to Jared.
Yep.
You must have signed it so hard it ended up in 3 pieces, mate.
Yeah, righto.
So I did let him know it was an IKEA mug and he just needed an Allen key and to go back together. But
stuff needs to be strong to be my signature.
It's got the weight of your brilliance resting on it. It's clearly not packed enough to contain such strength and power.
You've probably nailed it there.
Good. I'm glad, mate. I'm glad. Oh, good. And how have our couple of weeks been, gentlemen? Anything exciting stories to tell?
No.
We're an exciting bunch, aren't we? Excellent. I remember one episode where this happened and I asked 3 questions. We got 0 responses. So we're going to try and improve that.
I've thought about guns a lot.
Good.
Yeah, a lot, yeah.
At least that's a response. Yeah. Jason, have you been shooting?
Yes, except for last week because we had 40-mile-an-hour winds at the range and they were worried the target frames were going to snap, so the shoot got cancelled, unfortunately.
Maybe you can use some STS targets.
Yeah,
there's the plug.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Sean. They don't fall over in 40-mile-an-hour winds. Anyway, sorry.
So they pulled the pin on that one, but yeah, I've been shooting pretty much every week out at lower light. And,
excellent.
Yeah.
And which club is it that you're a member of?
Phoenix Target Rifle Club.
Yeah, brilliant. And perhaps tell us a little bit about Phoenix.
Okay, Phoenix is obviously a target rifle club. We shoot F-Class and TR or target rifle where they use peep sights. Mm-hmm. Long range, I guess you would call it. It starts the minimum distance 300 metres and we can go right back to 1100 if we wish. Mm-hmm. Regularly shoot out to 900 though. Yep. That's the state rifle range. Governed by South Australian Rifle Association.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. And how long have you been shooting there for?
3 years now, which has flown by.
Hasn't it just?
Yeah.
Wow, that's... I remember when you first started out there and, wow, 3 years ago.
Yep.
That's full on. Yeah, nice, mate. Nice.
Yes.
Greg, you look concerned.
I did get out, I think. I don't think I mentioned it last... Yeah, no, it was a couple of weeks ago. I think it was just before the last podcast. Yeah, I got out and shot a couple of foxes with the thermal. So, did I mention that last podcast?
I think you were heading out. I think the last podcast you hadn't been out and you're excited about getting out in the coming weeks.
Yeah. I'm always excited about getting out. But, I got out and the foxes were on the move. It was fantastic. They're pairing up at the moment, so there's a lot of movement. Yep. And, I decked 2 and, missed one. Unfortunately.
No. How does that happen with a thermal, mate? I thought that was a perfect scenario.
I just blew it. Probably you record it so you can look at the recording and you can see, I've pulled that one. So, you can sort of analyse your disappointment a little bit.
Yeah, right.
But, it was a fair way out. But, I should have got it.
Well, speaking of analysing performance, I got sent something this week. This is from Mantix X, or Mantis X, sorry, which is a little training system. So I'm going to have a bit of play with this over the next sort of month or two, which is a little device that attaches onto like a Picatinny rail, and you tell it sort of where on the gun it is, up and down, left, right, which way it's facing, all that sort of gear. And then it interfaces to an app on your phone, and it will record like just as you're taking a shot and then afterwards, and see what movement and stuff is there and how much you keep it on target and such. So I've had a little bit of a play with it, but I'm interested to see. It was just dry firing, and interested to see, whether it told me I shot some good groups apparently, but I didn't actually shoot any groups. So hard to see, how accurate and how spot on it is. So next time I take it out for a live fire, in fact, I might even take it this weekend up to Darwin and chuck it on the rifle and see what it says. Because maybe I could use this to dispute my score and say, no, my training system said that I hit that well, so I'd like the points, please. So we could try that. But anyway, next time I actually get out to a sort of 100-metre range and try it out and see what the groups come up to compared to what it's telling me they're shooting like. So anyway, that will be interesting to see. So I've been seeing some good feedback actually. We got from some guys on Instagram saying it was really good, really useful. So we'll see how it goes.
So could you put that on a rifle and just have someone like hold on target and just see what their breathing pattern looks like and how their rifle's moving and test their position in that way? Or is it only from a firing?
I think it's only from a firing, Greg. I think it's only sort of when you pull the trigger, it records prior and afterwards, and will show you some level of movement. But I think it's determined how long it will do that. Yeah. To be fair, though, I haven't played with it much to see whether or not I can change that time, like give it more time to record that or not.
That's quite useful. We were talking about before the podcast, but in the Army days, in the WETS ranges, that I think it stands for Weapon Training Simulation System. I think that's right. But it had a coaching mode, and you could go to coaching mode and bring up a screen next to the target that actually showed what the barrel was doing, and you could see basically the movement of the barrel as someone was breathing. Just get them to relax, and you can see whether they built up their position right or wrong. So it could be quite useful from a training perspective.
Yeah, so interesting to see how that goes and whether or not that. Whether or not it helps, whether or not it relays good data, hopefully it does. Because I've seen lots of this sort of stuff, for pistol, but rarely does it translate across to rifle. So I'm excited to see something that may be really useful for rifle.
Well, you have to report back.
I certainly will. And the other exciting thing is off to Darwin tomorrow.
And you're competing, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, look out. Nice.
Not perhaps in ideal circumstances, which I'm sure will become apparent over the podcast we do up there, no doubt. But anyway, we're going to get up there and give it a crack. So we'll...
awesome.
Yeah, should certainly have good fun to do it. And if not, all I will attempt to do is sabotage Butters. And he's not competing, but just in general, sabotage Butters for the entire weekend. That's my backup plan, which I may actually enact as plan A, to be honest. So sounds much more fun than trying to compete.
And it was pretty generous of you, Rusty, to offer the AI rifle to me when you win it. So
no, it was
podcast prize.
It was
no to me. Like just give it to me.
The
me.
Do you know what was more generous?
Greg's offer of a couple of AR rifles?
Yeah, he did offer a couple of AR rifles to everyone who appears on the podcast.
Oh, why not?
Excellent.
Good, Jace. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to, maybe 3, Greg.
Oh, jeez.
3, yeah.
While you got your wallet out, mate.
Mate,
all on Visa, interest free.
Good. So, Jace, I guess we brought you in tonight to chat about reloading.
Yep.
It's one of the major parts of our sport that often isn't the sexy part of it. It's not pulling the trigger. It's not going bang or ding or whatever else aspect of it. But it's a pretty critical component within it. And I notice within F class, there's a massive school of thought around it. From what you guys do, and any sort of serious competition shooter is into their reloading. Yeah,
that's right, mate. there's quite a few different ways that different F-class shooters go about their reloading and load development, and lots of schools of thought on precision scales and measuring kernel accuracy and not worrying about that kind of thing either. And so we can probably talk a bit about that, I suppose.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's we did get a couple of questions on Instagram, by the way. I'm not sure if we've actually announced that we've got an Instagram on the podcast. So I'd like to take this moment to officially announce that we have an Instagram for the podcast, which is Precision Shooting Podcast. However you find that on Instagram, I don't know how these things work. I just press record and hope for the best. But anyway, we've got one, and we did get a couple of questions for it. So one, this is James, would like to know opinions on single kernel accuracy for precision reloads, which is something you just touched on there.
Yep.
Jace, if you want to talk to that, let us know what you think about that.
All right. Well, in the testing that we do, and we're not talking about extreme long range, but we're talking, 900 to 1,200 metres when we do F-class long range.
Mm-hmm.
We have done or found doing ladder tests that you can have a node in a ladder test that can be up to 0.6 of a grain wide. And if you know how much a kernel weighs,
not much.
not even probably a quarter of a 0.1 of a grain.
I guess that would be dependent on the powder too.
Yeah.
But what it indicates is that often there's a relatively wide scope for variation in the actual powder charge that can still give you good results, and measuring down to that tiny degree would not necessarily give you any noticeable gain. Is that sort of
that's exactly right? And I mean we're looking at accuracy, or aiming for sub half minute accuracy at any distance that we would shoot normally for 10 or 20 shots. So to be able to do that and not have to measure to the kernel, and it's proven, I would say, unless you're shooting extreme long range, 1,500 metres plus, then it's probably not that important to measure that small.
I guess that would also rely on the actual grains of powder, individual grains being the same size and weight, which I don't think they necessarily are. There'd be a percentage variation in them as well. So
that's right.
Yeah. Andrew, you've done probably the most extreme long range shooting out of any of us. Has that been a consideration in your reloading for that?
No, like I said, I've basically worked a load up, and again, like Jay said, and particularly with the bigger stuff, you've generally got what I found to be a wider sort of band that will be acceptable for the load anyway.
Okay. Yep.
Again, I was about to ask you, Jace, what I don't consider that level, of counting grains to be important at all. But what would you consider would be the bigger influencing factors?
As far as measuring your powder weights, or
no, as far as being contributing factor to what is a good accurate load for long range shooting.
Okay. Consistency in pretty much everything you do. Powder weight is only a small part of it, and once you've tuned to a load to a powder charge, obviously you can have a variation in weighing. It's not going to affect it, but you want to make sure that neck tension, that's key. It has to be consistent. I batch projectiles by bearing surface, or base to ogive if you don't have a tool to measure bearing surface. And case prep. Uniformity, inside flash hole deburr, primer pocket uniform, trim all to the same length, and all that kind of stuff. It all adds up to the 1% things that you've got to do. I neck turn my brass as well, so that they're all to the same thickness, and try and buy everything in as big of batches as you can, so you're not using different batches of everything. So
So I guess the long and short of it is you wouldn't say there's any one particular factor that you would consider to be more critical than the others?
I personally, I don't sort of think about it that way. I just try to reduce variation as much as I can in everything that I do, and it all adds up to working well in the end. So, yeah.
I guess a few of the topics that you've just opened up or hinted to there, we certainly delve into a little bit more. Back to what you said, interesting to see that you don't go to that level of getting tweezers out and pulling kernels out and doing that sort of thing. And I'm similar. I generally go on to sort of point one is usually what I'm chasing. The only kernels I'm interested in, the 11 secret herbs and spices from Colonel Sanders. That's about it.
Yeah.
But everyone's nodding. Good. Enjoy our food. The other question there was about now I've got herbs and spices on the brains. That's what I was going to say. The other question was about powder scales and different types of scales and such. What do you use yourself, and what are you sort of seen and like?
I actually use a Charge Master.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the straw mod.
Yep.
But my straw mod isn't just in the actual tip. I've used the whole straw and filled up the whole tube.
Okay.
Which I can give you some photos of that at some stage that you can put up on so people can have a look at it.
Nice. Yeah.
And just adjusted the speed that it throws it at, so it's a bit slower towards the end. And, I can load 100 rounds and I might get one overcharge out of 100, so it's pretty good. I don't even use a separate scale to check weights or anything like that. Everything just gets thrown out of there, yep.
And you found it fairly consistent enough?
What I generally do is throw under 0.1.
Okay.
Just because of that occasional overthrow. And then I'll just trickle up by hand until it just ticks over to the actual charge weight that I want. And then I'll just dump them. I don't worry about double checking the weights or anything like that. There's no need.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah, nice. And have you done any testing where you've compared the Charge Master to anything else?
Not to any other digital scale. I've got a manual RCBS scale there that I use for weighing things sometimes when I can't wait for that to warm up. So,
yep.
But they're both just as good as each other. It's just a bit quicker with the Charge Master.
Mm.
Mm.
Now, there's the name of it escapes me, but one of the guys that we've had on the show before, Bronte, he has a different scale or trickler setup.
Yeah, I can't remember it either.
Yeah.
I'll attempt to look it up.
Not talking about Prometheus.
No, I've seen a Prometheus. That's pretty impressive.
It's like a medical scale.
Yeah,
it's a different type.
A different type of scale to what sort of the Charge Master type scales are.
Yep.
Bronte explained it probably better than I ever would. But
yeah, did he do that on the air with the different the strain gauge versus the other type of gauge?
I think like the Force Restoration type. Yeah, did he do it on air? I can't recall.
I don't remember. I've got to go back and listen to it now because I've tried to explain that a couple of times and forgotten the appropriate words.
Well, basically, what he's obviously looked into it to a fair degree, and what he indicated is that the predominant type of digital scale, like on the Charge Masters, it's not necessarily giving you the exact reading of what it actually is.
Yeah.
I can't recall the brand of the one he has got, but the guy that makes these particular units, it's using a standalone scale where he's basically made a trickler that's run off a belt, so it's powered. It's not an all-in-one unit. It looks a little sort of delicate, but Bronte indicated it was quite quick and considerably more accurate. I think it was accurate to second decimal place, not just one. So
right.
What would be interesting would be to run direct comparison with everything else the same, like all your brass prep, everything the same,
mm-hmm.
and load a batch on Charge Master, for example, and load a batch on this different setup and
yep.
just see, because I guess that comes down to that thing of once you've done particularly a ladder test and you've got that band, as you said, which can be quite wide, if you're falling within that, it's not necessarily going to be a noticeable or measurable variable.
Yeah, that's right.
On target, anyway.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I know Sean from STS has done some testing of the Charge Master versus other scales, and the Charge Master showed inconsistency, but within a certain parameter, within the parameter they committed to, with the 0.1 sort of variation. So interesting, and that would be an interesting test to do it. But I guess the way you guys are going about load development, which we'll certainly get into shortly, buffers against those sort of inconsistencies.
That's right. Yeah.
Some of the other aspects that you're looking for getting your loads down. You talked about primer pockets.
Yes.
About deburring that.
So we deburr, or I deburr the flash hole, so from inside the case mouth out into the bottom, because the way that they make flash holes in most cases is they broach them, so they push a hardened pin or bit and force it through the base of the case, which obviously can leave a burr on around the inside of the hole.
Yeah.
So we take that burr off and put a very small chamfer on it so that it's as the primer goes off, the charge from the primer can spread out evenly into the powder and not burn up one side of the case first and then around or whatever like that. So then obviously primer pocket uniform, which we basically machine them all to the same depth.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yep.
So when you're talking about the actual flash hole itself, presumably, the cheaper run-of-the-mill brass is punched, but you guys use Lapua brass or Norma brass, or what is the general the F-class fraternity? They favour one or the other? Or?
In the class of F-class, there's classes obviously within that class. I shoot in F-class standard, so we all have to use either 308s or 223s, and we all are restricted to projectile weights of 155 grains in 308 and 80 grains in 223. Basically, you only got two choices of brass type for 308. You've got the normal large primer stuff, which is available in pretty much every brand, and then what I use, which is the Lapua Palmer brass, which is the small primer, small flash hole stuff. You do still need to do that case prep on that brass. You still get burrs, and it will be, if you might run the uniformer or the deburring tool through 90 cases and get nothing out of them, and then you'll get one that's got it in there.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And that's the one that'll be a flyer. You don't know that. You might think you've pulled a bad shot or something like that, but it's just reducing that variation. So
nice.
So I think they're drilled, but even still, drilling can leave burrs.
Absolutely.
So not necessarily as much as
Especially
punching.
if I was doing the drilling, it's not a pretty sight at all.
Yeah, no, you still get a bit of material out of them. Even you get a bit of material out of every case, some more than others, and that's the bit that you want to try and eliminate. That one that's got the extra bit hanging in it,
big piece hanging off or something on the inside.
Yep.
Yep.
Bronte got back to me, by the way. That scale is an A&D FX 120.
I was going to say FX 120. Yes.
Yeah,
I was going to say it too, but I forgot.
Yeah.
And he said that the auto trickler is called an auto trickler.
Yeah, because it's that scale with an auto.
Inventive name.
Yeah.
Probably made by a German.
No, that would be Das Autotrickler.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Excellent. Very good. So we were out last week. Last week? Yeah, last week on a 5-day intensive course. And one of the things that we found, the guys worked their way out and they end up having a crack at a mile. So two guys shooting it. One guy was using my Ruger 6.5 Creedmoor, but he was running factory ammo. He was running Hornady, the 140 ELDs, and he was shooting. It's at 1,665 meters, and we were sort of, he was really consistent with his wind calls. The winds was quite favourable. Let's put it that way. And they were sort of basically deviating high and low around the target. He did manage to crack one on there, but we virtually measured it, milled the variation in shots for that gentleman. And then another guy, Paul, was shooting a 300 Win Mag, and he was doing the same thing. Again, favourable wind conditions, and he was going high and low, and getting frustrated because he wasn't hitting the target. So while these guys were doing that, I grabbed their workbooks and looked back through their data and had a look at their SDs and their extreme spreads. Grabbed the tablet, adjusted, and made an additional profile and put that in, and worked out, basically that what their two extreme spread velocities would have been. Went out to Dan, who was the other trainer running it, and said, "Well, what's if you're going to mill that variation, what would that be?" And he told me, and the variation that he had told me that they were hitting high and low basically lined up with where their extreme spreads said they would be hitting, the variation between the two extreme spreads. So it was an interesting lesson to see that, that variation between ammo, directly correlating back to where they were missing the target. A couple of days later, one of the guys, Paul, who was reloading, had basically pulled his loads and done a bit of work to his brass, done a bit of work to his powder consistency, and he had then his SD was at 18 feet per second. And on the last day, on the Friday, he managed to put 9 out of 11 shots on target.
Just quickly there, Rusty, his SD was 18 feet per second before he did all that work, correct?
Sorry, correct. 18 feet per second before he did all that work. And then he redid it, put 3 out of 5 on the mile target, or just over a mile target, whacked the chronograph on to get some data from it, and did another 3 shots, and his SD was at 7 feet per second. Obviously a huge improvement. And then proceeded to those 3 shots put on the target, and then another 3 shots put on the target as well. And so he, as you can imagine, he was fairly happy. But it was interesting to see that direct relationship between the quality of the ammo versus the hits on targets, which is no big surprise, but to see it correlate so precisely back to the extreme spreads in there, the variation between their ammo. Obviously, the gentleman using factory didn't have a choice. That was what he's using, and didn't have the facilities to reload. But Paul, who was able to reload and change some things on the day, that's all he changed, and away he went. Did very well.
And what did he actually do differently when he took more care with his ammo?
Yeah, so one of the things he did is he annealed his brass. Okay, and it was 2 things. So he annealed his brass, and then he admitted to me afterwards that he threw his powder from a powder thrower, and only measured it 1 in every 10 or so.
So that's what he did before he redid the ammo, yep.
And then when he redid them, he used the Charge Master we've got down there and measured every one, and wouldn't accept anything outside of 0.1 or outside of what his measurement was. And so obviously between those two things, and it'll be very hard to quantify which one helped the most. I'm going to guess powder, but it was very interesting to see just those changes, a bit more attention to it, increase things significantly.
Oh, yeah, there's one thing I was going to ask you before, Jace, was annealing. Do you anneal personally?
I don't, because I don't have an annealer.
It's a good reason.
Yeah.
It's a really good reason.
But I buy large quantities of brass so that I don't really have to anneal.
Like all your brass is at the same stage in its life, effectively.
Yep. So, and any, if I'm ever loading any projectiles or seating projectiles and one feels different, requires more or less force, that gets put aside and gets used for fowlers or siders or whatever. So, they do get pulled and noticed. I still fire them, but they get used up when it doesn't matter, so to speak. I have got someone who's got an annealer that I'm about to anneal the current batch of brass I got, but I've also got some new brass that I'm going to start using while that gets done, so I'm not out of ammo.
Yeah, because that's one that I've got an annealer, but I've always wanted to do a sort of a more sort of precise test on the particular standard deviation effect that has. I mean, I think it's probably fairly considerable, the effect it could have.
Okay.
Particularly if brass has been fired maybe a couple of 2-3 times without being annealed.
Because a lot of people put annealing down to longevity of the case life.
Yeah, that wouldn't be my motivation for doing it.
Yeah,
consistency of neck tension would be the main thing, and also when you anneal, you're also touching the shoulder. So when you're bumping that shoulder back, if you are doing that,
it stays in the same spot rather than springing back. Yeah.
Yes, so annealed brass will have higher neck tension than unannealed brass because it doesn't spring back after you
when it runs through the die. Yeah. But I mean, I think the critical thing is consistency as well. I think if you were to measure, if you had a batch of brass, it would be interesting to check. It would be time consuming to do it. But if you had, say, cases that were fired twice versus, say, 3 or 4 times, what is the hardness of the brass in the neck of those cases. It would vary. I'm sure it would vary because brass work hardens. So
Yep.
the more it's been fired and sized without annealing, the harder it will get.
Mm.
So I, without actually having tested that down to a really sort of fine degree, I think it would be a pretty considerable variable to actually take out of the equation.
Yeah, I think Brian Litz's last book, he did a bit of testing on annealing, but I just can't remember the outcome. That's all. So, yeah.
No, you're
Very
right. He certainly
anticlimactic, but
Thanks, Greg.
that'd be worth a look.
Even the new guys give me a hard time.
Yeah.
I love it.
Right.
And had I had that book here, I'd grab it out and we could check, but that's currently elsewhere, unfortunately. So,
Oh, well.
but yeah, then that same book, actually, we may as well give it a plug because that same book talks about exactly what you're talking about with deburring the flash,
Yeah, all those
flash holes
elements. Yeah.
and a few things like that, and talks about scales as well, I believe.
Mm. And does live round testing with each of those elements.
And has a section on rangefinders just for Andrew.
Yes.
Actually, talking about books on reloading, I've
Yep.
got a recommendation for anyone that is looking for literature. I just got to find the bloody thing. I think it's Michael McPherson.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
good one.
Yeah, I haven't heard
Should
of
be
him
up in
myself.
that cupboard up there, Jace, by the way, if you want to reference it.
Yeah, I'll just get it.
All right, well, after nearly ripping Andrew's head off, we've managed to grab the book out of the cupboard. I don't know why I keep that book locked up. I guess it's that important. That's right, isn't it, Jason? It's that important.
It is a pretty good book. It is Michael McPherson, or Mike McPherson, Metallic Cartridge Hand Loading. I recommend anyone that wants to buy books about reloading to definitely grab that one.
Yeah, it's very comprehensive, but also quite easy to read.
Yes.
Actually, yeah, you don't have to be a reloading genius to uncover it and get through lots of it. But it's got some really in-depth content.
Yeah, good book.
Mm.
Excuse me, guys. I'll just read it.
So, Greg, we're all waiting for you for comment, but he's
I'll
just
get back to you after chapter 1.
okay. No problems. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Probably 20.
You just pay someone to read it for you, wouldn't, and summarise it. He's got no comment for that.
Sorry.
He's quickly he's on freelancer.com trying to find someone to read it for him. All right.
Oh,
Good.
groovy. Looks good.
It is a
I'll
good
take
book.
that one. Thank you.
I feel that's all right. I've lost a book, but I've gained 3 AR rifles. So I feel it's a fair swap.
That's a fair trade-off.
It's an expensive book. Just letting Ben know I'm still waiting for my silencer co-radius. Just putting it out there. Jason, another question for you that often comes up, and obviously for the other guys in the room, load development. I know that you were talking before and you alluded to some different options and some different ways of going about it. How do you go about it and some of the other things that you've seen? Because there seems to be no end of things.
All right, so I do what we call a ladder test, or I think it's called the Audette method.
Right.
And so basically what you do is you set up a tall target, usually done at 500 metres or further away.
Do you get someone to set that up for you?
We set them up in the target frames and have someone pull them and mark each shot. And basically what you do is you load up 18 different charge weights and you fire at the same point on the target, and those increased charge weights should climb up the target like a ladder.
Yep. What sort of distance? Sorry?
Well, I do mine at 500 metres.
Yeah.
There's guys in America that do them at 1,000 metres, but because of where I shoot at lower light, the House of Pain, the wind doesn't really allow for you to do it further back